Call to order this meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Thursday, March the 30th, 2023. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district and today are located on the Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we all gather today. So Chair's announcement, we have a couple of very special guests in the gallery. We have Richard and Grayson Onslow, who are here to watch democracy in action. Hello, Richard and Grayson. Thank you for being with us today.
We usually have ice cream, but sorry.
I understand there were cookies, so that's an acceptable substitute possibly. So we have a grants department update. The TNRD Regional Grant in Aid and Sponsorship Spring Intake will close on Monday, May the 1st of 2023. These regional grants and sponsorships intend to provide financial assistance to local not-for-profit community groups and charitable organizations for services, projects, or initiatives that provide a social, economic, recreation, or environmental benefit to communities within the TNRD region as a whole, and thereby enhance the quality of life for all its residents. Application forms can be found on our website, or interested groups can feel free to contact Kim McMillan, Grants and Research Assistant, for further information. Thompson-Nicola Regional Library update. The TNRL is excited to announce the launch of bat packs. Bats are an integral part of our local ecosystems here in the southern interior. They eat half their body weight in insects each night, including mosquitoes, which is good news for those of us who don't like mosquitoes. They are the only flying mammal. They sleep upside down and they see using their ears. There will be no test at the end of this, so don't worry. So the bat packs, which are available for free for patrons with a valid library card at any of the TNRL library branches, each contain an echo meter that identifies local bat species and some fun informational content, including a book about bats, so that everyone can learn about bats and their role in nature. So they are available for borrowing for up to 6 weeks at all the local libraries, and you can go to the TNRL's website, www.tnrl.ca, for more information. And you will have in your blue folders a poster, and this is, I have a personal connection with this, and that is that if you like live local theater, the Winding Rivers Arts and Performance Society cordially invites you to their production of the award-winning murder mystery comedy, The Game's Afoot, which is at the Ashcroft Hub for 5 performances between April 12th and 15th. It is a laugh out loud comedy that will also have you on the edge of your seat as you try to figure out who done it. There are a couple of TNRD connections. One of the leading actresses is Janelle Robelin, who is the wife of Andrew Robelin, from our waste reduction manager here at the TNRD. And for anyone who wonders what I do with my spare time, since January, I have been directing this production. So it's going to be about 180 to 200 hours of time from me, thousands of hours for all the volunteers who take part as actors and back of stage people. So if you feel like coming out and supporting local theater in our region, we would be very happy to see you. We have some alternate directors in attendance for today's meeting. We have alternate director Marion Bell here for Vice Chair Smith. We have alternate director Nancy Beppel here for Director Kelly Hall. And we have alternate director Joris Eckering here for Director Tricia Thorpe. We have a lot coming up here for upcoming meetings and events. April 3rd, Savanaw Community Information Meeting. April 5th, we have community info meetings in Avola and Blue River. April 19th, we have a Finance Committee meeting and a Policy and Governance Committee meeting. April 20th, we have a Regional Solid Waste Committee meeting and a regular board meeting. April 21st, we have a committee of the whole. April 25th to 28th, the Southern Interior Local Government Association will be holding its AGM and conference in beautiful Vernon. In your blue folders, you'll find the aforementioned poster and anything that is addressed to you personally. We move on to item 4, additions to or deletions from the agenda. We do have one addition, and that is a piece of information correspondence. So a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Director Grenier and okay, Director Morris seconds. Any further additions to the agenda? On the question, then all those in favor, opposed, if any, carried. We have the minutes of the regular board meeting held on March the 9th, 2023.
So moved.
Director Stamer, thank you. Director Getz, thank you. Any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none. And Director Blackwell, thank you. We see you up there in Zoom land. Seeing and hearing nothing on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. Item 6.1, delegation, building infraction, permit expired, Sunshine Valley Road in electoral area. And is there anyone here to speak to this particular item?
Chair Roden, no, there's not.
Thank you. All right, item 6.2, building infraction 168, Disdero Road, electoral area. Oh, is there anyone here to speak to this?
There is not.
Thank you. And item 6.3, Director Eckering. Thank you. Thank you very much. You. We'll just wait for alternate Director Eckering to recuse himself. Director Thorpe is not here today, and alternate Director Eckering has recused himself as a longtime friend of the family who knows the proponents. The property is registered to Donald Glasgow and Kenny Glasgow. Director Thorpe is the wife of Donald Glasgow and lives in the subject building. If she were here today, she would have recused herself from the discussion. So is there anyone here to speak to this item?
Chair Roden, there's not, but I just wanted the board to be aware that Mr. Donald Glasgow did send me a letter because the correspondence for section 57s do come under my name because as a corporate officer under the legislation, if the board authorizes, I filed a notice on title. And so he did just want to express that he does understand and accepts the need to file the notice. Unfortunately, given some family dynamics and the fact that a number of family members are on title, there unfortunately isn't the ability to get agreement on signing of some documents that are needed in order to address this infraction. So I just wanted to share that information with the board.
Thank you very much. We move on to item 7.1, building infraction, permit expired, Sunshine Valley Road, electoral area, and we do have a recommendation. Oh, yes, sorry. I'm glad you recognize that in a timely manner.
Chair Roden, sorry, Chair Roden, if I may, the board still needs to vote and discuss that matter. So he should so I guess we could send him back out again when we get to it again at 7.3. Great.
It will be coming up again as 7.3, but no, he should, alternate Director Eckering should be back in here for the previous two. All right, so you're back. So back to item 7.1, we do have a recommendation. Director Graham, thank you. Second.
I'll second.
Director Stamer, thank you very much. Discussion? No discussion on this item. So on the recommendation, then all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. Item 7.2, building infraction, electoral area O. Director Blackwell, you'd like to make the motion?
No, I have a question on it if somebody else in the room wants to make the motion.
Okay. Director Stankey, thank you. Director O'Reilly seconds. Discussion, Director Blackwell, I gather you have something you'd like to say.
This is the Disadero Road property, I believe we're on.
That's correct.
Thank you. My question is to staff. There's a lot in this one, but specific to the septic system, who regulates that? Is it IHA or is it Ministry of Environment? How is that generally handled? And when we become aware of things like this, because I do know what happens out there in the world, who is the reporting body that our staff would pass that on to, and what's that process like?
So, good afternoon, through the chair. A building permit application brokers the process of a septic filing, but it is Interior Health, not us, that administer the BC sewerage system regulation. So if there's no building permit, yeah, there might have been a filing, but in this case, I don't believe there was. And this house wasn't visible from the road. We weren't aware it was built, and unfortunately, these folks bought it.
Does that answer your question, Director Blackwell?
It answers half of it, but who specifically is responsible for the regulation of septic fields and
So-
basically enforcement of them when they don't?
Okay,
Yeah.
the enforcement is by Interior Health. And the not by registered on-site wastewater practitioners, it is Interior Health. And we do communicate with them weekly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? Director Stamer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering from staff's perspective, because of the circumstances around this, Ms. Savokova, where is the responsibility of the Realtor in this process? I mean, I don't understand how they were even able to purchase the property in the first place if everything, there was basically no paperwork on anything and nobody even knew there was a dwelling. How is that even possible?
This is a difficult file, as I said, because it is not the fault of the current owners. We did do what we call a building information request. It's the same thing a lot of the municipalities in the city of Kamloops does. We did that at the time that they purchased it, and it tagged that there's no, as far as we were aware, it's a vacant property. Whether that was passed on to those purchasers, I don't know, but all our records in this regard are public and they're shared, they've been shared historically, including with the current owners.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So obviously, it sounds like the TNRD has done everything legally that we were supposed to do, but is there a mechanism or is there a way that we can get the Realtor and that whole situation involved in this? Because I mean, obviously, this shouldn't be happening.
No.
So whose responsibility, if we've done everything that we're supposed to do, we're telling them that there was no building permit, there was no permits, but they still went ahead and sold the property. Where's the responsibility supposed to lie? Who ultimately is supposed to be responsible for this kind of thing? I would have thought that the Realtor should have been taking responsibility for this. So where is the downfall in the chain?
So first, it can be where there is no Realtor involved. In this case, I believe there was a Realtor involved. Complaints can be made to the Superintendent of Real Estate for BC, and they often are. As well, we have reached out because COVID put a kibosh on this, but we're way overdue for a lunch and learn with the Realtors to stress the importance of this. But other than that, a homeowner, I believe, has recourse through the courts against a Realtor. Other than that, that's the only avenues I'm aware of.
Any other discussion? Item 7.2? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And now, yes, 7.3, alternate director Eckering is once again recusing himself. And we do have a recommendation on item 7.3. Thank you, Director Ranta. Director Getz seconds that. Is there any discussion on this item? As you've heard, one of the property owners is aware of the necessity for the proper permitting, but feels that due to family dynamics, it is unlikely to be forthcoming. Any discussion? On the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. If someone, thank you, Director Houghton. Thank you. We move on to item 8.1, which is draft 2023 to 27 financial plan bylaw 2811. Just a note that a previous version of the agenda noted that this was an unweighted vote. That is not correct. The final version does read that is a weighted vote on this item. Just wanted to clarify that in case anyone had seen a very early version. And we do have 3 recommendations. So I'm looking for someone to move recommendation number 1. Director Getz, thank you. Director Houghton, second. Discussion. This is that financial plan bylaw 2811 be introduced and read a first and second time. This is, I believe, Director Campbell, the time for any comments, questions, suggestions, because once we move to the next one, it's getting to be too late. Yeah.
That's correct, Chair Roden, and I would just perhaps maybe turn it over to CFO Fox, as I believe she has a presentation which might help with some questions that may come up from directors.
Thank you, CFO Fox, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Roden. So good afternoon. My second presentation for you all today. This one is going to be a little bit more detailed than the last. I want to thank you, the board, for being patient with me through the last couple months as I have taken on quite a role and trying to fill a couple pairs of shoes at the moment. So it's taken me every ounce of time and strength to bring you this budget today. We basically ran out of time in order for me to work with you through the finance committee. As we had previously said, we would try and bring this back to the finance committee for discussion prior to this presentation today. And I thank you for supporting the decision to bring it straight here, as I was fighting to meet this timeline with everything that needed to be done and incorporated. I also couldn't have pulled this all together in the time that I had without the help of my peers. The level of expertise and support that we have, I have as my peers, and the supportive leadership I have in Scott Hildebrandt has been key to me being successful in bringing this to you today. So I want to share that. And one last plug is my finance team, because literally I have been focused on this in year end, and that poor team has been carrying the day to day with very little guidance from me. So it's taken a team to get here today, and I hope that we bring you enough information to make you comfortable with where we're at. So the budget and the 5-year plan is a somewhat conservative, consistent approach, as I had said in the other meeting, to maintain the services and the delivery of those services. There's work to be done. It is not a perfect plan, but I think it's a reasonable plan. I do strive for perfection. This is where Scott's supposed to say, yes, it's perfect. We met in December to kind of give you an intro to the numbers. We had a half-day workshop in January throughout the budget and to go through the budget thoroughly and talk about tax impacts and give you kind of this is how to go through all the financial information, because there's a trick to giving you as much information as possible. And then with the regional district, that budget package is so extensive to actually understand what you're reading. I really wanted to try and help you through that information. Some people really want to dive in and actually understand how it's calculated. So I think you have a lot of information at your fingertips to be able to do that. And I'm going to try and keep it simple today. I've been requested to just stay at high level and take you through, but also recognizing that some people might just be starting this journey with us today and may have not watched the half-day workshop and those things. So to give enough information to give context with what I'm bringing forward. And all the information is in your budget package. I won't take you through. I did refer to page numbers before. In the essence of time, I'm not going to take that opportunity today. You guys can always reach out to me to kind of give you a thorough leading through that information if you need to. And I'm just hoping that you allow me to go through the presentation. I know that there'll be questions. It is sometimes helpful if direction or decisions are coming forward after I have an opportunity to just run through all the information, because sometimes you don't know that something that I'm showing 5 slides later might impact your decision that you're bringing forward. So I just request that I know that sometimes there's something burning and you want to ask. So, I mean, you're more than welcome to do so, but sometimes we miss some information in that. So we operate on an annual financial cycle with a year end occurring on December 31st. We are in the throes of audit. They come next week, and we'll produce an audited financial report that will be delivered to you before the end of May. The regional district maintains a 5-year financial plan for each service, and that plan must be adopted prior to March 31st each year. So you have an area that you're responsible for. That area has certain quality of life that they like, and they request services, and you bring those services forward. We have a service establishment bylaw for each service. And basically we work together to decide what we need to deliver that service to the level that you would like. And that breaks down in the end to financials. So in this financial plan, we do have some new service costs incorporated. That would be the Monte Creek Fire Protection Service. And then we have incorporated the Tobiano Fire Protection Service, although more information will be coming forward for discussion with the directors in the future on that. The cost of service increases, and we've talked about that through every presentation that we've had, is the economy right now, the cost, the interest rates, fuel, insurance, think of our recycling and our hauling costs, contract costs, everything's increased. And that is the large part of what's impacting us. We have had some cybersecurity requirements and IT enhancements where we brought in Randy last time to kind of give you a full understanding of what we're facing. And with the change in kind of scope of how we work, bringing in Microsoft 365, increasing our abilities there, and adding some switches to our server and cybersecurity has put some pressure on costs in the budget. We have a couple new positions that we've incorporated into this plan. One is a result of the strategic planning session we had with the board. And this does include the external relationship coordinator, which right now is housed in the administrative budget, but directly in the CAO's office budget. And due to, and you have heard us talk about this a bit with gas tax and capital planning, is the high demand and the lack of resources in our facilities department. And this is one I just wanted to mention today. Really, it's a position that would go from a 0.6 to a 1.0. It's less than a $24,000 impact, but it's really going to help in our capital planning department. And then maybe we can get more than 50% of our capital projects complete by the end of the year. We free up our manager and give him a little bit more assistance to help manage the facilities and projects. I want to bring forward, and I have a section on surplus specifically in the presentation. I want to bring forward in the future a conversation about surplus. I know that it is a key priority and discussion for a few of you. And it is just something I could not prepare for today. But I will kind of highlight that a little bit here in a few slides. We have been talking about a reserve fund strategy. And I think, you know, these are big initiatives that we really want to try and start and get going this year. And part of that is the long-term capital planning because we have large funding gaps. So if we have a 5 to 10 year, a 10 to 20 year capital plan that says these are the projects across our region that we need to incorporate and focus on, one of those, I mean, one of a large strategy to accomplishing that and making it achievable is making sure that we have funding available and that we're planning for that funding. And that involves reserves. So essentially it's, let's get our capital plan pulled together, consistent, collaborative across the organization. Let's look at the reserves, the grants, all our funding to support those projects. And then the surplus strategy kind of falling on the tail end of that. One of the things that we need to make sure is that capital plan is coming forward in a way that supports long-term asset management. And there's a lot of moving parts in there, so it will take time, but those are the things that I'd like to focus on for the future. So this wonderful 5-year financial plan cover sheet was brought to you by Mike and Colton in our communications department. It's a little plug for them. I requested a pretty cover to my largely numbered document, and this is what they gave me. I think it's great. I actually feel in the future that we could really put together a budget document for you that incorporates a lot of a strategy that makes a financial plan a lot easier to read. And that's kind of what I'd like to focus on, is delivering you guys a product that is understandable and looks good. So we don't really talk about the 5-year financial plan summary in detail, but I wanted to be able to check it off the list with you guys today, to be honest, to make sure that you guys had a brief look at it. Looking back in your previous presentations and what was brought to you before, there wasn't really a focus on the 5-year plan. It was mainly on the 2023 budget. That is basically the same thing, other than I'm throwing up a couple slides to show you the outlay and some of the things that I'm working on. So one of the things I noticed right away is that, and you would probably notice that this is the revenues, and without a surplus, obviously the demand on taxation goes up. We are legislatively not allowed to budget for a surplus. Surpluses occur, you're required to bring them into the next year as revenue. This is 140 services all summarized into one. Surpluses are all kept separate within each service area that creates them. It's important to know that you can't just take the surplus and use it as you would like. The other thing is surpluses year over year on average are coming in, and I looked at from 2018 till now, on average are about $7 million. So where I would get worried, what would red flag for me, is if those surpluses start to drop dramatically, because that's what's keeping your tax rate low. So if they're the same year over year, you're bringing in the same amount of revenue and allowing that tax rate to stay consistent. If that surplus amount drops, the next year we only have 5 million, or maybe we have $4 million of surplus to bring forward. Unless we have other revenue sources, your taxation is forced to go up. So that's why you see a dramatic increase. And what I'd like to do is work on a different kind of a strategy that we'd still have reasonable surplus year over year, and we bring our expenses into alignment, and then you wouldn't see that dramatic swing to the next year. But I need time to do it. I just want to make you aware that that's something on the list. So overall, the 5-year plan, I'm actually reasonably happy with the year over year increases from 25 to 27. But what I would say is that what it's lacking is a consistent contribution to reserves to fund your capital in the long run. And without that plan in there, it's not really a realistic plan. We're doing it to keep the numbers low so it looks good. And it's a good strategy to go to the public, but as far as being financially accountable or responsible or sustainable, it's not what I should bring you to start with. I should bring you something that you can reasonably say, we're going to plan for our future assets. So the expenditures in the 5-year plan, you can just see that the revenues minus expenditures go to zero. That's our balanced budget strategy. I'm not going to spend a long time going through there. It's just really broken down by our different departments, and it won't be very meaningful. However, within your attachment, there is all this information with line by line detail on every section here. There's so much information there, it would keep you busy for months to try and actually go through and understand. I know, because it just took me months. So what I want to do again is say that we have actually brought some value, I think, to the board, even in a short period of time over 2022. We're giving you detailed financial statements, line by line for each service. A breakdown of the total taxation requisition amount required is provided by each municipal area and electoral area. And I know Director Stamer, this was something that he had brought up in the beginning, to really be able to see this detail by each of your areas, which is a strategy in itself to kind of keep you guys entertained and understand what's happening when you're really focused on your area, and give you that information at your fingertips. Extensive breakdown and explanation of tax impact. So we have spent a lot of time on that. So I know for some of you who do not want to understand how tax is calculated, and it is one of the most complicated parts of my job, I have given you a lot of information to calculate that if you really want to. We have provided you with a capital plan. When I look back, I don't actually see a detailed capital plan listing that has been provided to you. So I think that's great. Is it, the best plan that we could come up with and give you the most detail? No, but it is a large step ahead of where we were, and it starts us with a framework to move into that strategy really quickly. And I won't belabor that. Same with a reserve summary. So again, I don't see that looking back. So you have a reserve summary, which details every reserve that we have and the balance in those accounts predicted for the next 5 years. We have, what we're working on is the 10 to 20 year capital plan, reserve fund strategy, grant fund strategy, surplus generation and use strategy. So to get into the goods here, the general operating expenditure increase is sitting at about 8.57%. That includes the transfers to reserves. There's many different ways this information has been shown to you within the report and here. It does exclude the capital because that is a misleading line item to this overall increase. And it removes the 5.4 million coming from the community building fund and the 1.1 million of community works fund or gas tax fund, because those are added in as revenue, but they are directly expensed out. It zeroes out and it skews the true increase for you. If I put those numbers in here, it looks like this giant increase, but it's really just revenue going into a reserve fund, and we have to show that financially. Gas tax, just a quick bit of information, was treated previously as deferred revenue. There is going to be an accounting change recommended by myself and the auditor. It is more treated like a revenue. So we have to recognize it as revenue and then put it into reserve buckets. So it's just a way of financially accounting for it a little bit different. We recognize it as revenue only when we spent it on a project. Now we're going to recognize it as revenue as soon as we get it, and it'll be in deferred revenue, still there to fund projects. So the total utilities user fee increases or fees revenue in utilities is going up just 2%. Just a quick refresher on this graph. I just want to remind everybody that if we started back in 2013 and we did a year-over-year 1% increase until 2023, we land in almost the exact spot today. And I don't know, I've done lots of graphs in my time, but this one really supported my story. So I really liked it. So it's got some colors. I hope it's meaningful to you. The one thing I would say, the green line in there says from 2013, if we actually adjusted our budgets based on the average consumer price index or inflation rate, we would, the trajectory, because of the inflation has been so great since COVID, would have to be way up, more towards the $28 million mark. So we're doing not too bad as comparison to that. And I think we'd feel pretty comfortable if we were giving a 1% increase over that period of time, that we're relatively where we should be. So the operating budget increase, revenue, general operating, we have total taxation revenue, $25 million. In 23 and 22, it was $23 million. That's where I'm coming up with 7.05% increase. I please want you to remember, in a municipality, this is quite meaningful. In a regional district, this means that the tax requisitions for the regional district went up 7%. That is very different for each of your areas. So, and I know people like to use percentages to talk to their constituents. There is a way to do that, but you have to look at your own tax requisition to calculate the 1% on the taxes owing. So the operating budget for utilities, you have expenditures of 10 million, 23 to 22. So it's just showing that 6.35% increase. And again, this is explained within your budget package. The utilities revenues, again, matching for the utilities with an 11.8% increase. The operating budget revenues, fee for service and parcel tax, this is just for your information to show you, because we always talk about the taxation at these meetings and we don't really talk about the user fees. I just want to give you this bit of information. The general operating budget is funded based on taxation generation. The utilities services is a separate fund. It's kept separate in financials, and it is funded by user fees, not taxation. That's the difference. So I am not going to go through this in detail. This just shows our comparison between 22 to 23 per department budget. This is explained. I've tried to give you in detail a material accounting of each department and what has changed. So you have a sense of what's going up and down in those departments within the reports. How do we decide what to charge in tax? There's so many things. There's a lot of people that want to be an expert in this and really understand it. It is really complex. There's a number of factors in here that affect it. Number one, BC assessment is completely separate. They do assessments and they come up with the value of your home and your assessments. It's separate from taxation. It's used in a calculation to calculate a tax rate so that we know what we can charge per resident to come up with the dollar value we need. So the TNRD service delivery costs are determined separately from assessment. TNRD sources of all other revenues are determined. So fees and interest and grants and surplus and reserves, whatever other revenue we can find. So we have the total expenses minus all those revenues, leaves us with the amount that we need from taxation to run those services. Then we use the assessment values to come up with a tax rate to charge people. I think sometimes people think that that taxes determine what your assessment is, and that's not the case. The BC assessment actually has a good website that breaks down your assessment for you. They've been asked that question, I think, a lot because they've done a really good job of explaining it. So that's basically a summary of how I'm coming up with the taxes owing year per year. And what we try to do is compare the average home value from the previous year into what those taxes would be, and then what's the increase of that average home value to calculate the next year's taxation. I know I didn't explicitly say that in the hospital district presentation, and that was a comment, but two different home values were used in that calculation as well. Taxation implications, as I said, there's a $25 million, that's a 7.05% increase. So I want to make sure that you know there's a number of different ways that this is broken down. We have the municipal, all the municipal totals together. We have the electoral area totals. We have specific local service area totals. And those all are totaling together to what is equating to the $25 million and the 7.05%. You would have to go into the attached documents. Number one, on your assessments. If assessments change for your area, the way we distribute costs or allocate cost would have changed. So that when you're wanting to understand why your assessment might have changed up or down, number one, if your area has more assessment this year, you're picking up more of the bill from the TNRD. So that's going to be an increase. I use the village of Ashcroft, maybe strategically. I had questions from a few directors, and one was M, and M was actually a great example as well. And I did one for P. So I do have these. These are definitely, if you really want help explaining to your constituents the impact, I think Director Laird can attest to, if you call me, I'll run you through everything and probably give you more information than you ever thought you needed, but you'll be able to explain why. This is your menu. So this is Village of Ashcroft's menu to their quality of life. This is the services that they have, that they want, that they're paying for right now. And this is a cost for us to deliver them. The increase is $15,000. But on that amount of money, it can equate to a larger percentage. So that's a 6.4% tax requisition increase. If you wanted to understand for your area what a 1% tax increase is, you take 1% of the 2022 number, which is a 243,000. So the average home value for 2022 was on average, and this is where it gets really hard to give you guys all an idea of what an average home value is, because in your areas, average home value can be very different. So I couldn't do it for every area. I just had to use the same for everybody to kind of give you a general idea. So it's 14% from 22 to 23, from 598 to 679. So on average, if everybody's assessment went up 14%, and there was some growth in there, growth will add to the tax base, which means you'll end up paying less. Many areas, the residential tax base or assessments went up, but utilities went up and business taxes went up. So it actually offset the increase that they would have got from the TNRD's budget increase. So we have in 2022, $422 per year calculating based on all those factors. And in 2023, $420. So that's a decrease of $262 per year, or 0.62%. That doesn't mean that's the case for everybody. We have to use an on average scenario. So if your tax rate, or if your home value went up greater than 14%, you can probably anticipate that your taxes are going to go up slightly. If it was less, you probably will see a decrease of a little bit more than that. It also matters how much growth there was in your area. If there was no growth, yeah, it'll go up. If there's growth included in that, which there typically is, it reduces a burden to the taxpayer. So I'm not going to reiterate these. These are a number of things that I've been talking about that impact the taxation. And if you want, I can provide a copy of the slides to you for an understanding. But you can see there's many factors that impact whether your taxes are going to go up and down. And it's hard to bring an impact. You have to do it on a per average basis. The other comment that I would like to make is that typically we have the revised assessment roll to us. We don't have it yet. It's supposed to come in this last week of March. We were going to try and incorporate that impact for you. Typically, it just includes people that have fought their tax assessment and they want it reduced. They want it changed. I would say typically they want it reduced. They don't usually want it higher. So that could affect the taxes going down. However, there's usually growth in there. So that there will be an impact. I can't guess at what that will be. Hopefully it's minimal. But we will have to incorporate that into our final. I imagine they'll send it out tomorrow and expect me to have it incorporated in a date. So again, there's a website for BC assessment and it'll give you kind of an indication on how to explain impacts of taxation. Ashcroft, to do this calculation, I had to go in and compare 2022's requisition to 2023. And the classes are on the left, and you can see how the assessments were affected between 1 year to the next. And the large increase in light industry that's reduced the burden on the residents. So there was an assessment increase in growth of 21.7% in Ashcroft. There was a residential assessment increase of 17.7%, but the share that they had to pay decreased by 3.3% because the other classes increased higher. And if you look at major industry, they pay 3.4 times more than a resident. So when you're paying $1, they're paying $3.40. So they make up a majority of that bill. Obviously, I know you guys don't want to be here for a month, so I can't go through everybody's area and municipality here, but if you would like me to take you through that, I will take you through that. Just give me a call. So I've talked about long-term capital planning. I just want to tell you that in the package, there is a detailed capital plan. 2023 is at $21 million. It's a little bit less. I think we were at $24 million last year, and 50% of those projects are being carried forward. So there's only about 50% of new capital in this list. It is accompanied by my best attempt at putting together a funding strategy, but you can see where this plan starts to dwindle off. 2024, we go down to 9 million. There isn't a year that we've only spent that much on capital. So we're going to refine that. We're going to bring that conversation back to you. Reserve funds. Reserve funds are extremely important for the investment of future capital. They're also important for things like Community Works Fund or gas tax, because they want to see that you've allocated your funds to your capital infrastructure projects. That's what confirms to them that the funds are there and being used. The reserve schedule right now is trending downwards because we're using those reserves to fund projects, capital projects, and we don't really have a reserve contribution plan. Surplus. So surpluses are exactly what they sound like. You're given $500,000, you spent $300,000. The remaining of that is a $200,000 surplus. Every service we have is like its own financial statement. Each one of them generates either a surplus or a deficit. It's very rarely a deficit, but it does occur. If it does go as a deficit, I think of street lighting, maybe 1 or 2 of the budgets had $1,000 overspent. That gets carried forward in the next year, and that requires more taxation to cover it. So it works in the opposite, but it's just not something that's typically happening. There is no time in the current strategy or the format that we bring budget to you to go through 140 budgets and have you determine what happens to the surplus. The practice here year over year is that surplus is carried forward as revenue. Operating budgets are planned, and it's taken up in that operating budget, or there's actually a strategy to transfer it to a reserve in some cases. And we are trying to do that because we are acknowledging that we want to change it. So we've done that in a few places. And, you know, there is a conversation. Do we need a policy on what you want to happen with reserves or with surpluses? Certainly they help administration guide decision-making without having to take 140 budgets to you. So that will be part of the conversation that we bring to you. So right now, where I was red flagged was and it just goes along with the story of all the cost increases. our current surplus amount has decreased. So on average, as I said, we were coming in at about 7 million a year, year over year. We're down. So that what that means to me, to bring to you is that typically if I see that, I'm going to say, you're going to see a tax increase because you have less revenue to cover your costs and you're going to need more taxes to pay for the same service. Services haven't changed. So, and I just threw over to the right a little kind of a diagram of where I came up. I used the surplus year over year and came up with an average. So we're winding down. I wanted to just give you a last look at the numbers before I kind of finalize the conversation. The expenditure increase, which I think is important to for the directors to understand, and I think we have went into quite amount of depth to give you an understanding of why those increases are there. The overall taxation requisition increase, the total utility user fees. Even my mouth is tired of me talking because it's starting to trip over itself. Okay, I really tried to, Director Roden, I really tried to like talk past through that, and I hope you guys are all comfortable with where it is. But if anybody feels like I need to go back and elaborate, please let me know. The required amendments for completion. So, and I talked to Deanna about this. There are a couple things that have changed that don't affect the bottom line, that if you guys were amenable to, I would just include in the final version of the budget. What it is, we've got Fire Smart grant and offsetting expenditures. So we received a grant of $700,000 that has to be used directly for fire smarting. It would be a revenue and an expense, and I would include it in the budget. It does increase the overall total expenses and the total revenues. But it is nice because then I wouldn't have to it takes a month about to do an actual budget amendment. So if we could incorporate that, I would be grateful. But if you're more comfortable with keeping the numbers as they are, I'm also amenable to that, of course. Emergency services vehicle, we have a trade-in. What we did, and we're learning, we included a vehicle at the net of what it would cost with the trade-in, and I would like the expense to actually capture the total cost and include the revenue. So all it would mean, and I could have summarized it better here, is right now we have $50,000. I would like 70,000. So it would be $20,000 increased expense and a $20,000 increased trade-in revenue. It zeroes out. There's a net impact of zero. It does not affect taxation. Those are the two things that I risk putting them in there. I definitely don't want it to take away from your comfort with the budget. So either way, we will be fine and we will move forward the way that we need to. Remember that the revised assessments aren't complete yet. That would change assessment values. And remember, it doesn't affect the budget. What it does is it affects our tax rate calculation. And all that does is tell you what it costs your taxpayer. So if you're happy with the financial plan and the numbers in there, the new assessments affect how much each individual gets charged. So hopefully I explained that appropriately. So, and you know, the 99% of the year end is done. We're working on reconciling a few things. I don't anticipate any changes that we can't carry forward to 2023 at this point. That is my budget presentation for you today. I will turn it over to Chair Roden if there's anything that we can address and answer.
Thank you very much, CFO Fox, for that and for your hard work and that of your team on this year's 5-year financial plan. Now, just please correct me if I'm wrong. You are, we could just go back a slide, please. Thank you. Am I correct that these amendments, you would like to see these after first and second reading and before third to be included in this year's budget?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Have you by any chance crafted a motion that might succinctly and accurately
We were kind of thinking as amended, but we could explicitly state including the Fire Smart grant and increase for emergency services vehicle with an zero net impact to the budget, something like that.
Thank you. And please, Director Campbell, if you could refresh my memory, we do have a first recommendation on the floor. Did we get that far?
We
Yeah.
did, yes, the bylaw's been read a first and second time, so now is the time that amendments can be made. So if the board supports the amendments proposed by CFO Fox, then once they would vote on that, and then the third reading would be that the board adopt, that the board, that the bylaw be read a third time as amended.
Thank you. So we do have a recommendation that the financial plan bylaw number 2811 is introduced and read a first and second time. So that has happened. So this is the time to make any amendments. We also have an opportunity for comments, and we have some eager directors who've already put their hands up. So we will start off with Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much, CFO Fox, for the presentation. Just a couple of things that came to mind. The latest one was the Fire Smart grant. So now, where is that money going to be spent? Like, how are we going to be spending that? I see in your budget that we also have a training officer, I believe. Is that for local fire departments, or I'm not sure what that training officer does, but where can we spend that money?
I can answer that through the chair. So the Fire Smart budget includes the majority of it for this year is the community wildfire resiliency plans, which is actually coming up on the agenda. So those plans are required for each electoral area before we can move forward with other Fire Smart initiatives. So that's a big chunk of that budget, and the remainder is Fire Smart coordinator that would facilitate that whole process, as well as do education and outreach work through this year.
All right, thank you. And for supplement, for CFO Fox, can you give us a quick rundown on, like, looking through the budget? I'm trying to figure out what's going well and what's not, and you sort of encapsulated it by saying the surpluses are starting to decrease, so that's showing that our revenue streams are dropping. Can you explain to us what you see department to department, where we should be focusing our efforts in the future, particularly with our inflation rates and some of the extra costs that are coming through? Can you see any warning flags that we should be aware of?
That's okay. Thank you. I brought it up, so I have to be prepared to answer it. So I think where the biggest risk is right now, from my perspective, is I take for an example, the economy that has shifted in housing markets and building, and our building permits and our planning department, and hopefully not putting Regina on the spot. I think that we over exceed our revenues in that area quite often. But there's a big turn in the economy, and that has shifted quite greatly. And if that trajectory continues, now we've somewhat conservatively estimated our revenues in the building services department. If the bottom drops out on that market, that will greatly affect our ability to deliver that service without having a huge impact there. We carry those surpluses over knowing that there's quite a fluctuation, and it is a hard area to predict. That's right now where I'm seeing risk there. I'm actually possibly put Jamie on the spot here too in a minute, but the surpluses overall across the board are slightly going down. And I'd say a lot of that is due to contractor costs, fuel costs, insurance costs. It's not any one area. So I think I'll leave it at that. That's right now where I'm seeing that risk. And then I will be very prepared to get into depth. I do have surplus changes per service right in front of me, but it's elaborate. And most of them are within, $20,000 to $40,000, and then some are jumping up and down. But I don't want to belabor it. I just want to give Mr. Vieira a chance if he sees any, has any further comment on his services.
Thanks for that. I think I would just echo Carla's comments that the inflation that we're experiencing across the globe really is really, we really noticed it in this last year. And even though we were over last year, we're still in an okay position and within our budgets to manage it. The shrinking surpluses or spending more to the absolute limit is I think what we can expect in the future. So what that ends up doing as Carla showed is that it'll be impacting our costs are increasing and our surpluses are shrinking, and the taxation is going to be impacted by that at the end of the day. So that's what Carla was alluding to, that we need to look more long-term planning in.
Next, I have Director O'Reilly, and then I have Directors Grenier and Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the CFO Fox, just to start, that was the best presentation I've seen on the regional district budget since I've been here. It was simplified and really it was a great education process here today. So thank you for that and educating the entire board and myself. There was things like, oh, that makes sense now, rather than having to go through so much. So thank you for simplifying that for us to all understand. And I just wanted to follow up on a comment you made with the surplus surplus and the reserve policy. And you'd mentioned it makes it a bit clear for staff and direction for staff, which is great. But I just want to note the city of Kamloops went through this about 2 years ago. And while it definitely helped with staff, politically, it also made it a lot better and easier for the council to operate, that it wasn't a political discussion on 5 or 6 accounts every year. It was, okay, we have the political discussion on a policy as a whole on what we think, and then rather than 7 debates every year and the same thing comes up again. So, and it is a daunting task. So kudos to you, and I believe it's Director Bass is chair of the Finance Committee. So all the best of luck to you, Director Bass, and I look forward to a more wholesome debate around that. But thank you so much for getting us here.
Thank you, Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to CFO Fox and her team. It's refreshing to hear that we're making great progress, and it's also refreshing to hear that we've got more things to do. And it's in that context that I'll be introducing later in this agenda. As a member of the Finance Committee, I'll be introducing a motion that touches on the progress that we're trying to achieve, just to affirm to taxpayers that directors are looking at this thing quite apart from administration looking at these things. I do want to bring up one specific example that will explain my motion. And I'm just wondering, because we've talked about this before this meeting, if you could just bring up dangerous dog control, page 34 of 143, just to explain where I would like us to look at going in the future. Not worried about the dog control today, but if you can bring up that slide, I can quickly roll through that.
Hi there. Sorry, the Director Grenier had brought the exact slide that he wanted to put up, and I conferred just briefly with corporate services, and we couldn't incorporate it because it wouldn't have been following the agenda protocol, but we can possibly go to the agenda package. I don't know if we can bring up, are we able to show pages from the agenda? Or is that difficult to do? Maybe people could refer or go to that page
Well,
in the agenda?
Is there any way that we can just bring up slide 34? Because
Oh,
what we've
34.
got is a very simple page that identifies what our Finance Committee needs to do. And it explains this dilemma about surpluses. Because do we need a policy? Yes, I think we need a policy. I'm not about to talk about what the policy is. I'm just saying we do need a policy. And I think it'll become quite evident if we can bring up this slide, why we need a policy.
It's not in there. It's in the actual agenda, but if I can,
30.
Sure.
So on page 34 of your agenda package, what Director Grenier is referring to is the dangerous dog control budget. For people that can't go to that quickly, what it shows is a 5-year plan. The 2022 actuals in revenue is $226,000, of which $174,000 of that is surplus. So the actual budget and the actual amount spent in that service was $36,000. So with Jamie coming in new in his role and myself coming in new in my role, we did see this. It is in Jamie's purview, so I will turn it to Jamie to speak to, but to give you guys an understanding of what's happening is the large surplus has been carried forward for a number of years. There is a plan for the surplus in 2023. And in the 2023 budget, there's a $239,000 revenue, of which $190,000 of that is reserve surplus. I think you can see the point being, there's a $50,000 budget and $190,000 surplus. The plan that Mr. Vieira and I were working on to bring forward for you guys in that budget is transferring the surplus to the reserve. Before we speak specifically about surplus, I just want to make sure Mr. Vieira has an opportunity to talk to the budget in as a whole. I think it's important for you to have an understanding of what the plan was for that surplus in that budget. But I know that Director Grenier's conversation is about surplus in general and using
right.
this one as an example.
So if I could just perhaps paraphrase what you're saying. The cost for dog control last year was $35,000. The budget last year was $50,000, which means that we had a $15,000 surplus just over last year. But that it gets added to a $175,000 surplus. So right now in this silo called dog control, we have a $190,000 surplus for a service that last year cost $35,000. That's 4.75 years if, and it's a big if, I'm sure we got some explanation, but we've got 4.75 years of surplus at the current spend of last year. And we need a policy because right now in this budget forecast, we are carrying forward a continuation of estimates of cost of dog bylaws. And maybe we just hit it lucky last year. Maybe we just say 15 grand and next year we'll spend more than 15 grand. I'm not focused on the dog bylaw. I'm focused on a $190,000 surplus versus a $35,000 cost. And the finance committee, working with our team, is going to look at this. And I just want to affirm to other directors and taxpayers that we are looking at this. And we're working on it collegially. That's the point that I'm trying to make about this particular area.
Thank you. I think probably the same thing has occurred to a number of the directors looking at the budget for the first time as when I came in and I was looking at it for the first time. And right away noticing the large surplus in where I've come from, that isn't a practice that I'm used to seeing. And right away I went to Scott and said, hey, you know, what happens here? Like, why does this occur? What is the story behind this? I would like to shift the focus. But before I do that, I need to gain an understanding of why it's happening and what's occurring. And what happened is my job quickly shifted and I was overwhelmed with a lot of other things I needed to get done and bring forward and make sure you had an accurate budget. So the surplus conversation itself needs to be brought back to you guys to understand year over year. What you have to understand is, although a surplus is generated from something that happens in the previous year, right now it's been treated as a consistent revenue. And when that revenue is removed, taxes go up. So we need to have you guys all on the same page of understanding and bring you guys some solutions to cutting that down to something that seems reasonable without accidentally impacting something like solid waste where we're funding capital And it's like the hospital budget, there's huge swings in costs, and we're trying to keep the tax rate consistent. What I hear in what Director Grenier is saying is, let's say in protective services, for 4 years, we don't charge taxes for that service. What I can tell you is no one will notice when the taxes aren't there. But what they will notice in 4 years is when there's $50,000 more they're being charged. So I have to go with what previously people have learned in these roles, is to make sure that consistent tax rates are held to keep constituents happy, especially when a majority of them don't understand or read or attend meetings or read our plans. So my strategy this year, after going back to Mr. Hildebrand, was to say, okay, I uncovered that I think we need to solve this problem, but it actually needs more thought, and I've got to appreciate what's happened in the past and leave well enough alone at this point. So we started the conversation internally, and we will be bringing that conversation back to you. It's a big conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And just supplemental to that. As you pointed out, we have 140 separate silos, separate surpluses. And I get your point that we don't want to find ourselves 2 or 3 years out with a great big tax increase. But consider this. In the dangerous dog control silo, we have $190,000. And even if we said, oh, we're just going to continue on at 35,000 or 45,000 or 55,000, we are building, not just from last year, but from chronically $190,000 on a $35,000 service. And we have 140 silos that we've got to look at. It's not going to be the same in each silo, but we should identify where we have excessive surpluses, and we should have a policy that says something like this. Maybe our target is 1 year's surplus equal to 1 year of the annual budget, like perhaps a strata corporation of a high-rise building. That's their objective. And under certain circumstances, we might want to say, oh, it should be 2 years. This is 4.75 years. And there might be an explanation for it, but we should have a policy that says, staff, this is what we'd like to target. And if it's exceptional, bring the exception to us, not just sort of continue on with this. That's my point on the supplemental. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Directors Sarai, Beppel, Bass, Morris, and Middleton. Director Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and CFO Fox, thank you for that presentation. And I think my family would cringe if I told them I spoke up on a budget meeting at the TNRD, because it's not my expertise. But one thing that did catch my attention, and I didn't see it, and maybe I'm wrong, we're concerned about lack of surplus and revenues. When you talk about future projects, big and small, is there a place in our budget for asset management so that there's a account put away every year, similar to the city of Kamloops, that we look after our assets at a regular percentage, so we don't have to go and borrow money to do that? Would that be something that would be coming out in this policy, or is it already in there?
Thank you. Through to the board. I think that, so we don't have a direct line item on the budget at this point for asset management. I do think that we are in really good discussions with the senior leadership team as the direction and structure we want to see for asset management. I won't go into that further. I'll let that go back to Scott. But overall, that's where, when we put together this 10-year capital plan, it's only a small piece of what we need to be doing with asset management planning. It really, we need to look at total impact assessment, so that when we buy capital and it has ongoing operating, when we bring you a report, it tells you you're not only approving $1 million, you're approving $1 million and 50,000 a year for the next so ever long. And you need to put 10,000 away every year to make sure that you're planning for its replacement. There's a whole strategy behind there that is part of a comprehensive asset management plan. We are right now doing what we need to do as far as ticking boxes. It's just not fully coordinated, and that's what we're working on. I'll turn it over if you have any more.
Through you, Chair Roden. I just, maybe to sum that up, is all of these suggestions are exactly what we're building into our operational plan. It's exactly what we're going to bring to you in meetings with the finance committee and with this board. And we've got ideas for policies and everything. So we'd like to bring them to the finance committee, bring them to the board, and then allow the board to decide what the direction is going forward. Yeah.
Alternate Director Bethel.
Thank you. Thanks CFO Fox for your presentation. In terms of the risk, you said that one would be inflation in terms of the budget. But going forward, like for myself, I would think the risks of climate change in terms of just all of the infrastructure that we own would be a huge risk. It's not clear to me how it's incorporated into the budget in terms of collecting money for it, or how we maybe put away a reserve for it. Could you speak to that?
Thank you, Chair Roden, through to the board. The overall climate change, again, doesn't have a line item. I think that's a great point. We have carbon action funding that's provided to us that we need to use to incorporate into projects. So we get a bit of money every year based on our carbon neutrality. We get to use that money to put towards some of our capital projects. That doesn't address exactly what you're asking. That's one of the ways we incorporate that. The other things that we are doing is more in Jamie's envelope, and I'm going to let him speak to that so I don't butcher it. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll start by reiterating what Ms. Fox said, that we don't have a service related directly to climate change or planning. So we don't have one budget, we have 140, and we don't have one of those that's devoted to climate change. Now, that being said, in our budget processes and this discussion about asset management, absolutely agree that needs to be considered and built into those asset management plans and capital plans, and that's what will be top of mind through that whole process. But as Ms. Fox said, we're not there yet, but that's in our to-do list. So asset management planning will need to consider, and already does, I know, the processes that other local governments are going through, considers climate change as part of the asset management planning process.
So supplementary, how do we have confidence that there is enough put aside for the risks of climate change if it's divided across 140 items?
I can't guarantee you have enough for your current capital without a capital plan that extends out beyond 10 years. So I think I've identified for sure that there's a gap. We don't have a great answer for your question. I think it is something that we are talking about. I think it is something that needs to be built into our asset management plan. I think we have people on staff that are very aware of different components of that. As far as when we're dealing with solid waste, I know with our emergency preparedness plan and our emergency management, we have put in a lot of time and resources into planning and providing space for dealing with emergencies. But when we're talking that are some resulting of climate change, but actually proactively planning is just an area of weakness right now.
Thank you, Director Bass.
Oh, thank you. Just an observation from what Director Grenier was saying and what Director O'Reilly said. I not only chair policy, but I chair finance. So the linkage to get the concerns from finance into policy making is going to be pretty simple because I'll be in both of them. So I don't think we're going to have any difficulty other than working through how we're going to create those policies, because there's some me.
Thank you, Director Morris.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I'm going to just go back to dangerous dogs for just a moment, not because of the actual topic, but because it relates to a policy question I have for you. So it seems to me that a service such as that one is an opt-in. You've got various areas within the regional district who have opted in for that support level. It's created, from what I'm hearing, possibly from what you said earlier, creating quite a revenue surplus in a sense. You've got extra dollars in that you have not utilized. So then my question is nothing to do with the dangerous dogs, but more when you have an opt-in service like that and a surplus is accumulating to that level. If our constituents are opting in, is there any authority that they have in terms of can we arbitrarily remove those revenues, or do we have to go back to those that have opted in?
Thank you through to the directors. Number one, I would say in a perfect world of budgeting this year, we would have had earlier discussions. And for all the services that your area pays into, you would have seen that on your menu list of options. You would have seen that. We could have had a discussion with each of you on what that financial statement looks like. That's kind of been our plan coming up this fall. That would give you the opportunity, because of course, even if 5 areas pay into it, the whole board has to decide if that's what they support. But typically that begins on making sure that the directors have a good understanding of the budgets that they're paying for in the area. So one of the things I would say is going through it this year, when I did see that, right away I had a conversation with Mr. Vieira to talk about why it's there. We have to have an understanding. And then if it wasn't needed, a discussion would have to come back to you to say, look, we have this surplus, we'd like to put it back in there and benefit the next 10 years of budgeting. But what I can say, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Vieira, there is some needs within dangerous dog. And we didn't feel that the money would go to, I regret saying this, go to waste. It's going into a reserve, and there's some plans around that money. So on an individual basis, as we go through each of your area's budgets, we would see that's there, and we try to analyze and assess whether it's required or not, and what kind of discussion we have to have here. Yeah.
So thank you. And I don't think, Jamie, to hear much more. It was really the broader question. I was using one as an example, just where we have opt-in services generally. What is a policy around that? So that was really what I wanted to get to, not specific to Area P or to the dogs. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Did I answer your question? I didn't really speak specifically to policy. There's a service area establishment that guides what we can tax for. And typically, if there's a capital bylaw, you would have here we create capital reserve bylaws that would dictate what that money is for. So if it's going into a capital reserve, if there's already a bylaw there, it will have parameters of what you could spend that money on. Yeah.
Thank you. I have Directors Middleton, Rain, and Director Blackwell. I do see your hand up there on the screen. So Director Middleton.
I'll try to be quick. Thank you. Just as we look at this, this is a draft. Do we see that 0.705 moving at all? And is there any opportunity to move it down? Even if just under 7 as opposed to just over 7?
Thank you, Director Roden, through to the board. So this is actually the final budget. We didn't consider this a draft, as the budget is due to be adopted by the end of this month. So it doesn't give us a lot of time. It doesn't mean that if you approve this, if there's other decisions or direction you want to make a budget amendment in the future, if you had an idea and you wanted to make a budget amendment today, you could and adopt. There's just with the complexity of the budget, sometimes it's difficult to make a quick decision in this short period of time, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it.
Director Rain.
Thank you. You mentioned we need to be consistent in moving the $40,000 out and using surpluses could have impact on our ratepayers, and we may see some pushback. I'm stunned until the last question. I haven't heard any discussion about sensitivity for our taxpayers. We're talking about 8.57% increase in expenditures. And we're not expecting any pushback. I mean, I'm not so sure that the taxpayers of the TNRD are all in a financial position where they can afford 8.5% increases or 7.05 increase on their taxes. I mean, I would have thought that was more shocking than dealing with the aggressive dog surplus. But I am concerned a little bit more about the process. If I understand it correctly, this bylaw has to be passed by tomorrow. So that means today. I don't know if there was much discussion about by this board on the 5.4 million that we received as a surprise gift. In fact, interestingly enough, provincial government had, I believe, a $6 billion surplus. So they managed to pass $1 billion back to local governments. Well, from my point of view, I look at it and say, this is all money that was overtaxed. You don't have a $6 billion surplus without overtaxing somebody somewhere. So we got some of our tax money back, but we quickly stuck it in a reserve, said, well, and this board didn't make that decision. And I would have thought that that was, if we had the right type of financial process and a finance committee that was really working with administration, that these are board type decisions. I mean, I'd love to say that we should take a portion of the 5.4 and help reduce taxes this year, but at the 11th hour and 59 minutes, there's no time to say, hey, we ought to be taking some money and covering some of this tax increase. I mean, I don't totally understand the library capital, but I've raised it on a couple of occasions. I'm still not understanding how we're getting good value for our taxpayers' money by having a third library and all the costs that relate to that. And I keep hearing it. I've been on the board for a while, so I've heard it before. Well, we'll get grant money to build this. So it won't cost us a nickel. If you really believe that, I mean, it will cost us maybe 30% or 35%. But on the other side, we still got to operate it. That's $1 million plus. I mean, these are decisions I believe that have to come from the board. So I'm a little concerned, and I do apologize. Please don't take it personally, because I recognize you've been here all of I guess now 8 months or so, and a lot thrown at you. But I do think longer term, the board has to get a finance committee that's really working with the administration and representing board interests while all of these things get worked out. There's no question, and I congratulate you on the presentation, because this is the most I couldn't imagine how you could make accounting more complex than what we have in this whole system. But I keep thinking about what can we do to make it simpler, and where we should be able to move some of these surpluses from one account over to another account where we need it. But I'm losing my point here. I just really must say the process is flawed. I mean, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of this region. There is no open hell that we could change this budget at this point. I mean, we could, but it's very complex, and we're really throwing a monkey wrench into all the work you've done to date. But there has to be more involvement of the board in producing these budgets, so that we don't get to a meeting and say, you've got today to pass this thing, or we're not going to be in compliance with Local Government Act. Too late. But I just hope that Finance Committee take this seriously and put us in a position where the board has more say in how this budget is developed. That it isn't just coming from staff and decisions made at staff level. Basically, we can't really have much input. Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the 5.4 million, we only found out how much we were getting on March the 3rd, and the guidelines only came through within the last 10 days. They specifically do not allow you to use it to reduce taxes. It has to be used on infrastructure. So coming that late in the budget process for every local government in the province, of course, there has not been any time. But CEO Hildebrand, I know was going to be discussing this later on in the meeting, but I think he wants to say something now.
Thank you, Chair Roden, and through to the board. It is an unfortunate situation, given the election. We did have a successful finance committee meeting that did talk about the budget. We did have a half-day session to talk about the budget in January. And then we've done consultation publicly as well. So we've had time to do it, given the really tight timeline. But it is our expectation that moving forward, the finance committee will direct this process. We've already talked to them on timelines. We talked to them all the strategies we want to change. It's just one of those years that's extremely difficult. And then I also wanted to reiterate, yeah, we are not able to use that 5.44 million to reduce taxes. And we are not allowed to use any surpluses other than within that service. We can't throw it back and forth into other areas. So we're handcuffed in a lot of ways, but we're willing to work with the finance committee and of course, find a better process going forward.
And you had a supplemental, Director Rain?
I just want to point out, we're not allowed to use it to reduce taxes, but we are allowed to use it in a whole bunch of different areas within our budget that would have the effect of reducing taxes if we used it in the right way. So the comment that we can't use it to reduce taxes, we could use it in areas where it's within the grant provisions, and that we would have reduced taxes.
No, absolutely. We just received the communication, like we said, 10 days ago with the parameters and that's what we're working with. But yeah, totally understood.
And Director Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Fox, thank you for your work on this. I mean, this cannot be easy. A few things that this stresses to me. One is we need to have a good reserves and surplus policy, especially the reserves policy of being able to transfer some of those reserves around. When we do get one that's higher, like the dogs one. Overall, if you're telling me that our reserves are going down overall, that means that even if we slice off some of those high daisies, we'd have to add to the pots that are draining at an accelerated rate, and dog control might be a high daisy, but I'm sure there's a pot that's draining at 10 times that rate that we're going to need to fill. But my final sort of point here, though, is we're in such a short turnaround time from an election that this is happening to every local government. It's not just us right now. We're all in the same sort of boat, trying to get a budget done in a timeline that's greatly crunched, as well as you inheriting this from somebody else, and only being a few months into a system that the board knows was not up to speed with maybe modern accounting times, especially for regional districts. And I would just like to say that as we move forward, I would fully support an increase, in areas like software packages, accounting software, and a temporary bump in staffing in order to get those things online in a shorter term so that we can correct some of these things. But right now, as far as I can see, you're in an untenable position of having a massive ship to steer here without the necessary modern tools to do it. And I think the board needs to look at that and come to your assistance with policy and ideas in the near future to solve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Blackwell. Does anyone else have any comments? We do need an amendment to the recommendation to adjust for the Fire Smart grant and the emergency services vehicle increase.
So moved.
Director Stamer, second Director Sarai. This is an amendment now. So is there any discussion on the amendments? The amendment is to, Director Campbell, do you have it or? Recording secretary? The two items that were to be added to,
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify with CFO Fox what she'd like to see in the amendment. So my understanding is that the following amendments be included in the budget, the Fire Smart Grant expenditure of $700,000, as well as emergency services vehicle increase of $20,000. Is that right?
Yes, so the $700,000 grant and corresponding expenditure. And the $20,000 increase in the emergency preparedness budget also offset by an increased revenue with a net impact of 0.
all right, so that is the amendment that is under discussion. Does anyone have any discussion or questions, comments on the amendment? Seeing and hearing none on the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. So we do have an amended recommendation 1 that financial plan bylaw number 2811 amended be introduced and read a first and second time. Director Campbell.
Thank you, Chair Roden. So first and second readings already been carried. So that the next, based on this amendment, the next motion would be that the financial plan bylaw be read a third time as amended.
Move 3.
Number 2.
Thank you, Director Black. Did we have a vote on the first one or did we simply move and second it?
I believe we had a vote. Yeah.
We did not vote on that. We had the motion introduced and seconded, and then we were discussing the amendments that needed to be made between it being adopted for the first and the financial plan bylaw being introduced and read a first and second time.
Yeah.
We have not voted on that.
Okay, according to myself and the recording secretary, we thought it was carried, but that kind of complicates things a little bit. So let's just go with that it was, because then we're going to be backtracking. And then you'd have to redo the amendment. So if we can just go on that, the financial plan bylaw was read a first and second time. If you want to vote on it again, you can. And then the amendment was already passed. And so now we would be on to third reading as amended.
All right, so we had Director Blackwell introduce recommendation 2. Do we have a seconder for that? Director Smith, you seconded it. Thank you. All right, so we are on recommendation 2 that the financial plan bylaw number 2811 as amended be read a third time. Any discussion? No, seeing no hands on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried, and we have a third recommendation that financial plan bylaw number 2811 as amended be adopted. Anyone like to move that? Director Sarai, thank you. Second by Director Getz. Discussion. Seeing no hands, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried, and I think everyone might appreciate an adjournment for 10 minutes at this point. All right, I trust everyone returns refreshed. We move on to item 8.2, South Thompson Valley and Pinnetan OCP Amendment Bylaw. We do have a recommendation. Director Houghton would like to move that, second by Director Sarai. Thank you very much. And are there any questions, discussion on the motion? Then all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. We have a second recommendation here that zoning amendment bylaw 2768 be adopted. Director Houghton again, and Director Getz seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. Zoning amendment bylaw 2798 in Monty Lake. Director Houghton makes that motion. Director Morris seconds. Thank you. Any discussion? This is to adopt the zoning amendment bylaw. Seeing no hands in the air, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. Loon Lake temporary borrowing bylaw number 2806. We have a number of recommendations.
Recommendation 1.
Director Ranta, thank you. Second. Director Sao, is there any discussion on this? Anyone have any questions or comments? No. Then on the recommendation number 1, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. We have a second recommendation.
Move to.
Director Stamer, thank you very much. A seconder on that.
Second.
Thank you, Director Ranta. Any discussion on the second recommendation? Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is passed. And on number 3, we have a third recommendation. Director Sarai, thank you. Second by Director Smith. Any discussion? In that case, all those in favor, opposed, if any, and that is carried. We move on to reports. 9.1.1 Board Code of Conduct Review. We do have a recommendation. This, just so that everyone knows, this is not a time to make motions about things that you would necessarily like to see. You can make recommendations. It is not a place to make a motion that we include or not include such and such. This is a time for recommendations. Staff will take those, any recommendations that are proposed. And if we decide to go ahead with revising the code of conduct and then bring that back to a future meeting. Corporate Officer Campbell.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I just wanted to briefly speak to this. So as the board likely knows, there's a legislative requirement that the board consider whether or not they'd like to review their existing code of conduct, because the board does have an existing code of conduct. So we just like to ensure the board meets that legislative requirement to provide direction on whether they would like to review the code of conduct. And then at this time, as Chair Roden mentioned, it would be really helpful to get some input and some feedback on the types of things that you might want to see in an updated code of conduct. We've provided a significant number of examples from other local governments, some of which directors have actually let me know about. For example, the city of Salmon Arm, I know that they presented on their revised code of conduct recently. So hoping that those examples provide a good basis for you to identify some potential changes that you'd like to see. And then what we'll do is I'll take some of the feedback and suggestions today. We will bring a updated code of conduct policy to the Policy and Governance Committee and sort of workshop it with that committee. And then a final draft will come again before this board for any further input and final approval.
So we'll open this up to discussion first. I have Directors Bass and Laird in that order. Anyone else right now who would like to speak to this? Director Hammer Jackson, Director Sarai. All right, so we'll start with Director Sao. We'll start with Director Bass.
Thank you. It's a good code of conduct, but there's nothing in there that addresses what we do if someone breaks it. And I think we need to have some sort of something in there that has some substance for any director who does not follow the code of conduct at any time.
So Director Bass, you're asking that sanctions, a list of sanctions
Yeah,
be
so- yeah.
included for discussion. So this will go to the policy committee for
Yeah.
them to look. And I'll just say here, if anyone who was at LGLA went to the code of conduct discussion there, the city of Salmon Arm did considerable, very, very good work. They not only looked at sanctions, but they followed through with the obvious. How do we apply these? Who arbitrates, oversees them? So that was included, thank you, as an example. So Director Bass, you are suggesting that sanctions be added to our code of conduct.
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
I'd like to see something like what Salmon Arm did, but I'm not necessarily in the majority on that. But yeah, we need to have some sort of sanction opportunity, particularly if we have any directors who break the code more than once.
All right, thank you very much, Director Laird.
Yeah, I have two items. One is the code of conduct enforcement, and that's what Director Bass was talking about. And the other item I would like to see looked at is that each director actually signs the code of conduct. Because it's one thing to have a code of conduct, and if you don't sign it, it doesn't mean too much. You're actually acknowledging that you've read and understood what the importance is for the code of conduct. And those are the only two items. The rest of the code's really well put together now. Those are two items I saw. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, I have Director Hamer Jackson.
Yeah, I just got back from meeting the mayor of Nanaimo, and they just finished theirs too, so it might not be a bad idea to have a look at theirs they just finished it, so.
Thank you very much. Director Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Director Laird actually pointed out what I was gonna say about the signing of it. It's one thing to have a code of conduct if one of the directors for whatever reason breaks it, and you have a hearing or you have a meeting, nothing's gonna come out of it if they don't acknowledge it, and it just stays there. So I really like Salmon Arm at LGLA. We were there, like you said, Madam Chair. They've got it figured out. They did all the legwork. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. They got the teeth in it, and it was well received in LGLA, and I think we could really look at that. So that would be my recommendation to staff, is look at that, and it's got A to Z what you actually need for good governance. And if someone doesn't want to follow good governance, what can be done right up until the apology and sanctions.
Thank you, Director Sal.
Yeah, I think other directors, Director Bass asked the question I had about just clarity of consequences, and also like clarity on arbitration and who gets to be on the panel review for such conducts. Yeah.
Director Bethel.
Thank you. And this was, as far as I know, in the Salmon Arm Code, but also it shows up in the Comox Valley Regional District, is that that the code is reviewed on an annual basis with the board. And so that's not just a practice, it's within the code of conduct. So including the annual review as part of it.
Are there any other comments, suggestions? Director Middleton, did you have a comment?
Just a comment on the sign off. The last page of this document does show a sign off. So I think really the thing is making sure that that sign off procedure or requirement is followed and not just let slide.
Thank you. Are there any other suggestions, things people would like to see, questions, comments on the code of conduct or the next steps? All right, so we go to the recommendation, which includes any proposed changes. And just for clarification, the proposed changes so far are sanctions and enforcement and mandatory signing of the code of conduct by all directors. And alternate Director Beppel, did you want to add something about a review?
The there are a number that have an annual review by the board. So I think that that's a good practice.
Counselor Bass?
I thought the legislation, it's okay, anything will work with me. I thought the legislation required that. Maybe the corporate officer knows? No?
No, I don't believe it does, but I can confirm that. I believe the current board's policy does include a provision about it being reviewed annually. That's an update that we made, that the policy and former policy review committee made. I guess it was almost a year and a half ago. But we'll ensure that that's included in the updated version as well.
And if I could just make one observation on the importance of all of this. In Ontario, there's a coalition of female councillors who are lobbying the provincial government to change legislation so that codes of conduct for municipal councils include requirements to follow work safe regulations, even though we're not staff. And that adds a whole nother layer of consequences to their codes of conduct if they actually get that.
Thank you. I believe the provincial legislation around codes of conduct is that within 6 months of an election, the incoming council or board must review and decide whether they want to implement or make changes to a code of conduct. So that's the only provincial piece around that. All right, so if someone would like to move the recommendation, please.
Move the recommendation.
Director Sarai, seconded by Director Bass. Is there any further comment, question? Seeing none on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. Item 9.1.2, requirements under Accessible British Columbia Act. And just as clarification, the recommendations here would include staff advertising that we are seeking people to sit on this committee. That does not have to be a separate recommendation. It is taken as read as part of this. So we do. Director Ranta, thank you. Director Sarai seconds that. That's recommendation 1. Is there any discussion on this? Questions? Comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We have a second recommendation.
Move to.
Director Stamer, thank you. Second, Director Newstader, thank you very much. Is there any discussion on this? Director Stamer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. When would this start?
Through the chair to Director Stamer. So as soon as the board approves this, we'll work with communications to get an ad posted to recruit committee members for the public requirement. And then shortly we'll be sending out an expression of interest to this board because as per the terms of reference, we're proposing having 1 electoral area director and 1 municipal director sit on the committee. And we hope to have this committee up and running probably around May.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed, if any? That is carried. 9.1.3 Indigenous Skills Employment and Training Program. We do have a recommendation regarding 2 students. Director Rain, thank you. Second, Director Morris, discussion. Director Newstader, and then Director Houghton.
Thank you through the chair. I'm just curious about recruitment. How do we find the students who fill these positions?
Thank you for the question. It's something that I may have to follow up on with a bit more detail, but in talking to Judy, this is something we've done year over year and have worked with True University in the past. So I believe that is the answer, but if it's different than that, I will certainly provide a follow up to the board. Yeah.
Director Houghton.
Yesterday, Director Grenier and myself toured the libraries with actually 3 of the library people. And I brought this up to one of the ladies that I knew was going to be on the agenda and said it's worked well in the past. And we'd sure like to see us go ahead with it in the future. So I'm all in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. And just a note, anyone who has questions or would like to learn more about our library system, I know that head librarian Judy Moore is more than happy to arrange a tour of this library and answer any questions like you see some of the behind the scenes work that goes on that might not be obvious. So if you have any questions about the library service or what it provides, please feel free to get in touch with Ms. Moore. I know she would be more than happy to accommodate you. Is there any more discussion on this item? Seeing no hands in the air on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 9.1.4 Contract Award Community Wildfire Resiliency Plans. We have a recommendation. I thought you might like to, Director Laird. Director Ranta seconds that. Is there any discussion? Director Stamer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Vieira and possibly the staff.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility to invite both the BC Wildfire Service and Mr. Shrebnick to our next board meeting for an update? And the reason I'm suggesting that is we haven't heard from the BC Wildfire Service even last year. There wasn't any report on what was going on, and I know Mr. Shrebnick gave us a rundown of what was happening at the TNRD level, but it's just come to my attention. We just had 2 more grass fires today, one in McClure and one in Vinsula, and I don't believe there's any air support even today. So I would sure like an understanding on exactly what the heck is going on from both the BC Wildfire Service and also how this ties in with our community wildlife resiliency plans. It seems to me we're way ahead of planning than they are.
Thanks, Director Stamer. Through the chair, we actually have it on the agenda to invite BC Wildfire to do an update at our spring committee, the whole meeting, and we'll also have an update from our own staff, Kevin Skrupnik, at our at that upcoming committee meeting. So we haven't got confirmation. I don't know if the invite went out, but that's the intent.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments regarding the community wildfire resiliency plans? With one of the most awkward acronyms you will ever see. Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. 9.1.5 McClure Fire Hall addition and renovation.
So moved.
Director Stamer, thank you. Director Morris seconds. I'm sure these renovations will be as welcome in McClure as the ones currently underway in Ashcroft will be in Ashcroft. Director Stamer.
Yeah, thanks for the late mention there. I want to thank both the McClure Fire Department and the Barrie Fire Department, because with our mutual aid agreement that we have, both were responding to that fire and additional resources weren't needed, but I want to thank everybody involved that they were able to control it very quickly. So kudos to them and also to the TNRD for their fast action.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? On the motion, then all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. Committees, we have the Electoral Area Directors Committee, and we do have a recommendation, 2 recommendations arising out of that. Or is that a single recommendation? Corporate Officer Campbell, can it be handled all as one?
Yep, it's a single. I wasn't at this meeting, but my understanding is it's a single recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Laird is moving what is a single recommendation. Do we have a seconder? Director Houghton, thank you. Are there any comments, discussion on this point? No one has any questions on the Advisory Planning Commission. Director Rain.
Can somebody give a quick summary of what I think we disbanded this not so long ago. No, there's obviously a change of opinion.
We didn't disband it. We suspended it because of difficulties during the pandemic with having commission members actually be there. Some had retired, I believe, and we couldn't fill the positions. There were difficulty getting some to reply to emails. Of course, there was the whole pandemic kibosh on actual physical meetings. So it was just decided that we would suspend them until such time as the electoral area directors could get together and discuss it. And so this is what has arisen from that discussion. Okay. Director South.
Yeah, I'll just add to that there were members of the public who followed up with electoral area directors, like, what's the update? Can we bring those back? So there was a request from the general public.
I know that one person in my area is very keen on them, and I think that talking to staff and a couple of electoral area directors, the changes that are being proposed will make this a much more streamlined and effective process. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any? That one is carried. And we do have here for information, Wells Gray Country Services Committee. Does anyone have any questions of Director Sal? Director Sal, you're off the hook. And Fraser Basin Council, Director Ranta. Does anyone have any questions for Director Ranta? Yep. Certainly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment that we are looking for a committee member from Blackpool and East Blackpool, if you know any friends in that area who are interested.
Thank you. And we have Fraser Basin Council minutes from that meeting. Does anyone have any questions of Director Ranta? No, you're off the hook as well. We move on to item 11.2, Siwash Lake Wilderness Resort. They are requesting a letter of support from the TNRD board, and we do have a recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you, Director Ranta, second by Director Smith. Any discussion on this point? Director Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to, in case anybody doesn't know about this resort, it's a very high-end wilderness resort in the area, in my area, and it's went through the fires, lost half of their buildings through the fires, and the lady that owns it has been absolutely relentless in making sure that she's going to survive, and is out riding her horse one day and all of a sudden comes upon a couple of guys in a pickup truck and not on her property, but right adjacent to it. And so she talked to them and they said, yeah, they were there doing exploratory drilling for a possible copper mine. So she was never advised of it, and she's been tenacious as far as finding out what's going on and who's doing what. And so I really think she needs the support of all of us to make sure that she gets proper recognition. Because if I do have a friend in the mining industry who said it's kind of a 1 in 10,000 that the mine would actually go ahead, but she's very concerned about it.
Thank you, Director Smith. Director Beppel.
I guess that I don't know if I could support this motion. If you look at the mines around Kamloops, each of them generates between $500 million and $1 billion worth of revenue a year. And if we're looking at the prosperity of our region, mining underpins a huge amount of the well-being of all of us. And I appreciate that there's one business who maybe has $200,000 worth of revenue, or maybe even $500,000 worth of revenue a year, who would be affected. And I realize that the Mining Act is not very favorable for individual landowners. But in terms of what we see our region as, I think that we have to accept that we are actually a huge center for mining. And if we're to say no to this mine, are we going to say no to every other mine? Because every single possible mine in our region is going to be close to somebody. I guess that I don't think I could support this recommendation.
Thank you. Director Smith, if you could just turn your doodad off, please.
Sorry.
Doodad. Oh, my goodness. Director, you knew. Director Newstater.
I'll just turn on my doodad. Director Beppel opened a line to my question as well, which is, are there other property owners or businesses in proximity to this? I'm wondering about overall impact. Is it really a singular resident business owner who's done an effective job of advocacy, but is alone in this? Or are we talking many folks who are going to be impacted? Should this go ahead?
Well, she is the most impacted, I would say. The rest of the area would be sparsely populated, I would think. So, but it would definitely devastate her business for sure.
Thank you. Are there any other, Director Middleton?
I concur with both Director Bethel and New Staters. I don't think this is in our purview to be writing a letter in protest, shall we say, or whatever of a potentially something that might be good for the district down the roadway. But we don't know the views of the rest of the population in that area and or in the TNRD in general. And I think by putting our name on that, we start to send a message that we're somehow involved in kind of an advocacy for no mining. And I don't think that that's where we're at on the board here.
Director Sarai?
Just add another layer to it. I was gonna support it at the beginning. Now, the more I'm looking at it, it isn't for us to get in the middle of two extreme businesses on each side. But I see that they're supported by Destination BC, the Tourism Association. Those are the avenues that I think should be giving them letters of support. That's in their lane and that's the support they should get. I think TNRD should be neutral in concerns like this. It's a no-win situation for us to get involved in this. Whichever way it goes, we're not going to look good at either spectrum. So I think the best bet is just stay neutral in it.
Thank you very much, Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a similar incident in my area, except it was a gravel pit. Both myself and Director Graham, we didn't write a letter of protest. We wrote a letter informing or asking that the mining industry keep the people completely informed of the process and where they're at. Right now, it seems to be an unknown. I think if you change the tone of the letter and said that you need to recognize it, the impacts that are happening in the community, and you need to keep people aware of what's happening, is the mining industry has probably the strongest mandate of any company in mining, like in BC. They can come and, if you don't own the mine under or the mineral underneath your land, they can actually come and take it. It's a very powerful arm of the government. So that's what we did as directors.
Director Stamer.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I also don't see any letters of support from any of the Indigenous peoples in the area. And realistically, they pretty much hold the key to any of this, particularly with the new IPCAs that are coming out with the Indigenous protected areas, is that, they could squash the mining if they wanted to. So I really don't know if it's appropriate for us to be sending the letter anyways.
And Director Hamer Jackson.
Yeah, the same thing. They could also want it, and I just don't think we know enough about it for us to be, making a decision like that.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Director Laird, could you just knock your doodad off, please? Yes. Thank you. Director Rain.
Yeah, I was wondering if, and I always forget, I'm deferring, but perhaps more information. I mean, it'd be one thing to write a letter to say that if the mine was to proceed, these properties owners should be given due consideration, given their history on the property, but it's another thing to say we're opposed to mining. If we had with a letter of suggesting that the due consideration should be given to their historical use of the land in any application. Is that a letter of support?
Else have any questions or comments? So right now we have a recommendation that we write a letter of support. Oh, Director Blackwell.
Yeah, thanks. I would agree with a letter requesting that we be kept in the loop, but having watched this process up here locally, mines are a 30-year conversation. We're 20 plus years into one up here, and it still really hasn't got to the point where I think even environmental assessments have been completed. You know, I think as far as protesting this in any stage is 15 to 20 years too early. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Director Hamer Jackson.
Yes, another thing is who owns the land?
Director Stamer saying it's Crown tenure. So right now we do have a recommendation on the floor that we write a letter in support of the Siwash Lake Wilderness Resorts protect well-established ecotourism business in the TNRD from mining project. Is there any other further discussion of this recommendation? Director Bass.
Just a legislative question. Does the legislation allow us to take action that benefits an individual business?
Through the chair to Director Bass, so there is a prohibition against assistance to business, that's financial assistance to business. So I don't believe that the board providing a letter of support for this business's operations would constitute that prohibition under legislation.
Director Sao and then Director Sarai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we don't send this letter of support, I wonder if we also have the opportunity to give a brief feedback to the applicant why. You know, we want to be neutral, which I agree. And I wonder if we don't send a letter of support, if we would be viewed as, you know, not green.
Corporate Officer Campbell.
Through the chair to Director Sao. So this might actually be the first time that a letter of support has not been, should it go that way, supported by the board. So we always follow up with the requesters, whether it's a letter of support or in this case, it may not be. So I'm happy to follow up with the requester and pass on some of the discussion that was had here, or you're welcome to make a motion if you want to request more information from them. I'll take direction from the board, how you'd like us to communicate with them.
I would move.
Director Sarai and then Director Rain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just more reflection on it instead of a letter of protest. And I think it was brought up by one of the directors. Is there an opportunity of an amendment that we send a letter requesting that they just keep the property owner in loop of what their intentions or what their plans are? I'm looking at it both ways now. At least we're doing our due diligence of good governance for the resort, but we're not getting involved. We're just asking that the two parties talk to each other. Like the director said, she saw these people on her property, didn't know what was going on, is asking, maybe she's overstepping by asking us for support, but maybe what she's really asking is, can someone tell me what's going on? And maybe that might be our lane we stay in. And I'm wondering if I can put a friendly amendment of a letter just saying, can you please inform the landowner of your progress of what you're doing there?
Thank you. I was going to actually suggest that if that was the board's wish, then it might be cleanest and easiest to defeat this motion that's on the floor and then propose a second new motion, which is that we send a letter asking that property owners in the area be kept up to date and in the loop as to all developments going forward. Director Rain.
I would move that we table this discussion until such time as we have additional information that gives us a direction.
So we do have a recommendation on the floor. So Director Hamer Jackson.
Yeah, I'm the same, because you know, it wasn't on her property. I think you said it was off of her property and it is crown land, so there's probably somebody knows a lot more about it than what we do.
Corporate Officer Campbell.
Through the chair, just for procedurally, so Director Reen has moved that we table it, so we can deal with the table. So
Okay.
if someone else seconds that we table it, then that's it.
I'll second it.
Okay,
And then we can vote on tabling it.
all right. So there's no discussion on this. We just vote on whether we want to table this at.
Until such time that we have additional information.
Yes, until we have, then it will come making its merry way back to us. All right, so all in favor of the motion on the floor, which is to table this discussion? Any opposed? We have alternate Director Bell, Director Jim Smith, Director Bethel, Director Bass, Director Houghton. Opposed? So that is carried. Now we have information only correspondence, and of course you'll have seen the letter that was in your blue folder, which is a late addition, which is the letter from the District of Barrier to Minister Fleming. So this is so we'll just deal with them in order. We have the letter from the Honorable Ann Kang, Minister of Municipal Affairs, and CEO Hildebrand, I believe you wanted to speak to this item.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Just a quick brief update because we've talked a little bit about this already during the budget discussion. So the Growing Communities Fund was about approximately $5.44 million in grant money that was coming to us. We just received that information. The grant will certainly be coming before the board. That is something that the board will decide on how we utilize that funding. As you've seen in the budget, is right now put into reserve until that decision is made. In reading the letter, it was quite clear that I think the funding was intended for core infrastructure, municipal assets, that sort of thing. So that is addressing some of the huge infrastructure issues we have in municipalities and across our many regional districts in BC. So I think that was the intent of it. It would be my hope that when we have a fulsome discussion about this, we can actually share some of the information we have about asset management and about capital management so that we can provide a proposal for the board to decide on. I know Ms. Fox will be doing this. She will be bringing this process up in the near future, May or June, where we can have a fulsome discussion, make decisions and move forward on it. So I just wanted to provide that direction to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? And I believe Director Stamer, you want to speak to the late information item.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It wasn't late. It just got sideswiped, but or misplaced, but I just wanted everybody to know, if you read it, it's pretty straightforward. I'm not suggesting a letter from the TNRD, but what I'm suggesting, if it's possible, if you would take it to your municipalities and see if it's something that they may want to support and write your own letter. I mean, to me, I find it hard to believe that we don't have the ability to enforce traffic violations with out of province drivers. We do with commercial drivers in as much as it gets put onto their driving abstract. And most of the commercial fleets do pay their fines, but private drivers don't. And I don't know what it's like for people in this room, but I know on every single day, I see something from an out of province driver that's unsafe or dangerous on our highway 5. And so I'm suggesting that this letter was sent to Minister Fleming. I understand that he's trying to kick the ball over to the Solicitor General, so that's fine. We can do the same thing, but realistically, there's some really quick things that we can do. We can have ICBC send that information, share that information with other insurance entities in other jurisdictions. That will have the net effect of raising those rates for those drivers on their insurance. And then possibly we can start talking about collecting fines and how we would do that. And one of the things that was brought up at the radio interview that I had was the question was asked, well, wouldn't the enforcement officers be able to cherry pick these out of province drivers knowing that there's no way for them to fight the tickets? And my suggestion is, why aren't we having video conferencing with these types of situations? I mean, so if you're sitting in Edmonton, you could be fighting the fine that was in Kelowna, and then make it that much easier for the arresting officer because they wouldn't have to be there in person. They could be in their office wherever they are. They could be getting transferred or whatever, and they would be able to attend as well. So I think it's something that's important. I think it's a way that for us to be able to increase the safety on our highways, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, Director Stamer. Any other discussion or questions about any of the information items? We move on to item 12, new business. Is there any new business? No hands in the air, so we move on to item 13, and Director Grenier does have a notice of motion, which he will read out, and then it will come back to us for discussion at the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair. And just context, the Finance Committee meeting was postponed. It won't be convening until April 19th, and today we were dealing with our budget because of legislation. So I had the opportunity to speak to Director Laird and staff, and came up with the following motion, which I'll now read out. And it is, whereas the Thompson-Nicola Regional District is ultimately accountable to its citizens for how they raise and spend funds. And whereas the TNRD Board of Directors is committed to transparency and accountability in financial budgeting, spending, and reporting. Therefore, be it resolved that staff bring forward a progress report to an upcoming Finance Committee meeting on the following key initiatives. Reserve and surplus strategy with respect to departmental budgets. Review of bylaws involving third-party partner funding. Progress on our capital strategy moving forward. A revised timeline on our annual financial plan process, including Finance Committee and board involvement, and perhaps critically, opportunities for further budget consultation with TNRD citizens. And I just finishing to say that if the board adopts this at the April 20th meeting, the timelines would be such that perhaps we would have a progress report from our finance administrators at the September 6th Finance Committee meeting. So that's kind of the timing if this gets adopted in April 20th.
Thank you very much. We move on to question period. Are there any questions that we have received from anyone? Director Grenier?
Yes, and I raised this yesterday with CAO Scott Hildebrand, that a number of my constituents have BC assessments, for instance, in the North Valleys, Alpine Valley, that say Darfield or Savinaw. And their concern is that in the tax process, their tax money is either going somewhere else or they're being taxed at a different rate or so on and so forth. And it's something that we have to investigate. I don't know that it's critical to investigate it in the next week, but it's something that I think that we should be looking into. Along with that was the comment that these people had tried to correct that incorrect location with BC assessment, and they were told that the TNRD had to weigh in with BC assessment on that. So somehow or other, we need to get to the bottom of whether this is actually having an impact on people's taxes or on the revenues or the direction of the revenues. I can say personally, I live in Cherry Creek. My address says Barrier, so I don't know if I'm getting taxed at a Barrier rate or a Cherry Creek rate or whether the money's going anywhere. So thank you.
I believe question period is just so everyone is clear. This is for members of the public and members of the press. So that's okay. I know you're not writing for Kamloops this week, so I think we're good. But I think that would be a question best raised with staff outside the meeting or with BC assessment, and then maybe someone can point you to then help you point your constituents in the right direction for how to redress possible address discrepancies.
Thank you. Just a quick update. I did call BC assessment today and we're just waiting for an answer. So it certainly doesn't impact our taxation at the TNRD whatsoever. It's certainly a provincial issue that we will straighten out.
Thank you. And seeing no questions from the non-existent people in the gallery, I will declare this meeting adjourned. So that's official. But before you run away, we are going into another meeting. Very brief one, I am told.